All right, welcome back to All Hitches, NoVA's #1 football podcast. Coach Mason, good evening, sir.
How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. As we kind of just trudge along. My birthday week is coming up, buddy.
Yeah, happy birthday to you.
Birthday week, I say, because it's a celebration here of days. It's almost like the 12 days of Christmas. We do like the 7 days of my birthday here.
I'm going to take your role. Speaking of Christmas and presents, do we have a present? Usually we have a long banter, but we have a lot to talk about with a very special guest.
We do. In this very special episode at All Hitches, very special episode, we have the one, the only Tom Horn, the Executive Director of Athletics and Activities at Fairfax County Public Schools. I can't even say that. I had to catch my breath even saying it.
Yeah, and you put it out there a few days ago that we were going to have him on, and we have gotten inundated with questions, and we're going to try to ask him as many questions as we got, and but it's going to be a really informative episode for everybody out there. It will be really interesting what he has to say about a bevy of topics.
Yeah, I mean this is the guy, right? This is the head honcho, the main man, right? When it comes to athletics and activities and athletics is what we're talking about, obviously with football and other sports. So he is the guy, and who better to break down all these new policies and procedures and everything else than the guy that's kind of leading FCPS down this road.
The Roger Goodell of FCPS athletics.
That's it. That's it. Tom Horn is the Roger Goodell, and I am a Roger Goodell fan, my friend. He's a Washington Jefferson alumni, you know that, and I am a Goodell fan. I was a Tagliabue fan, not so much Roselle because Al Davis didn't like him, but I could stomach the other guys. And I actually did like Roselle, but I know Al Davis hated him. But yeah, so he is the guy, and smart guy, and actually. And I knew a little bit about Tom's background, and we're going to find out about that. And I told you, he's a smart guy. He's straight shooter. He knows what he's talking about.
So without any further ado, let's get into what people came here for.
Let's go in to get into part one.
Part one.
It's a long one, right? So we're going to get into part one of our Tom Horn interviews, and this part one we'll be talking a lot about the transfers and some of the new transfer policies in the county. So hope everyone enjoys that. Tom Horn. All right, welcome back. Here we go. Right now we have Executive Director of Activities and Athletics for FCPS, Tom Horn. Mr. Horn, it's great to have you on, sir.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be here.
So I kind of want to just jump right into it. There's a big controversy that's really big here in the Northern Virginia, the DV area in particular, and everyone's going to want to hear your opinion on it. Is the NBA draft lottery fixed?
Well, I came here just to talk about that because as most of the community will know, I am a big NBA basketball fan. It's absolutely fixed, right? In professional sport, that's why I work in the high school space, right? The education-based athletic space. We can have different values and different outcomes. So we don't have to worry about that NBA stuff.
Yeah.
It's sports entertainment, right? That's what they call it, sports entertainment.
That's right.
Tom, no, we're so happy to have you on. And I was telling Mesa a little bit about your background. So I taught, full disclosure, I taught both of your awesome kids. They're great to have at the old Lanier, now Katherine Johnson Middle School. But I knew back then, you were still at George Mason, actually, which is now Meridian. So everything's changed. All the names have changed. But tell us about, you here you are now, FCPS and the executive director. Tell us about the voyage and how you kind of got here.
Yeah, the journey. Well, what hasn't changed, Coach, is that your impact on my kids exceeds my impact on my kids. They tell me that every time I talk. When I told them I was coming on your podcast, they were like, "Dad, you finally made it." I spent 20 years in the city of Falls Church at the old George Mason. Never worked a day at Meridian. So when folks say Meridian, I can say I never worked there. I went to law school. I was a practicing attorney. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to keep coaching. And at some point, you find those two worlds are not practical. I had said this in a million forums, how blessed I was that the city of Falls Church had an athletic director that bailed on the job in the second week of August, right in the middle of football season. And I was sitting there with nothing to do because I was in between law careers, deciding which firm I was going to choose for my path that I wasn't real excited about. And I sat there for 6 months in an interim role. And after Christmas break, winter break, the principal comes and goes, "All right, what do you think?" And I said, "I'm going to take it. I'm going to keep it forever." And it was a 20-year, it was a tremendous time. Very grateful for those folks. But in 2016, some transition in the school division, superintendents moving to Connecticut, and more importantly, Kylie was starting out in Fairfax High School. And when you're a school-based coach in a DSA in a small community, you sacrifice a lot. I mean, my kids had birthday parties at school because that's where dad was going to be. And they got to high school and the timing was right. And again, super blessed that Fairfax High School had a teaching job for me. So I left the central office in Falls Church City, went to Fairfax High School, where I was a teacher and a coach, kind of reset everything for me. I've said it a million times. The only title I ever wanted professionally was coach. And that gave me a chance to get back to it. And I loved my time there. And then Kylie and Tommy graduate. And Kim, my wife, says, "All right, now it's time for you to get a real job again." And that timed up with an opportunity to come here to Gatehouse. And, 20 years as a building DSA, and I was the president of the State DSA Association. I know how hard the job is. And I had a couple of paths. I could go be a DSA again and do it at the school level, or I could use what little time I have left before I hit the retirement, golf courses, beaches, whatever I choose to do then. And see if
podcasting, maybe podcasting, who knows?
Yeah, I don't have the talent you guys have, I promise that. Come here with what time I have left and see if I can make the job of DSA better for the 25 that we have in the county, make the life of kids better for the 15,000 student athletes we have every year. So here I am and talking to you guys. So I know I made the right choices 10 years ago to come here.
That's all. What was it? I forget. What was your last year coaching? What was the last fall? What year was that?
So 3 falls ago, in FCPS football reference, I was out before Tony Rojas was a senior. So Tony Rojas junior year. Yeah.
No. Tony's a great way to mark. Sort of. I mark Fairfax kind of like with Tony as well. Sure. And yeah. So we coached against you. Were you the DC that year?
Yeah.
Mason was calling the offense.
We're not gonna get into a back and forth about how I kept getting Tony unblocked, but we're gonna.
It was a lot better that year than it was the year after that. So that was actually a fun game. The year after that was not a fun game.
Yeah.
Well, Tom. So look, no secret, right? We a lot of things happening, right, all over the county, all over the state. All over the world, everything. And you graciously accepted to come on, and we appreciate that. And we kind of wanted to get things going. I mean, we've been getting blown up on our end, and which probably is minuscule compared to you guys on your end. But we're getting blown up. People asking us, parents, coaches, asking us, what are some of these new rules? What's going on? When's it going into effect? So having you out here to kind of talk about it, kind of explain it is awesome. And it's going to be helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the platform. One of the known truths about the Virginia High School League Handbook and its 256 pages is that nobody's ever read it, right? I mean, that's we're all operating under these rules that over the course of decades and generations have been morphed in our mind, but never on paper. And having any opportunity, any platform to provide some greater transparency into what it actually says and some clarity with the way a school and a school division is supposed to process what actually is written in the book, I will take. I feel like, whether you're a coach, whether you're a classroom teacher, school administrator, you work in the world of education, you should be trying to educate at every turn. And if we're privy to knowledge, information, processes, and systems that other people might not be privy to, then it's our job to get it out there. And this platform is one way. And candidly, for both of you, I appreciate this because and we purposely set this up that this would be the first time we go out in public as me officially with SCPS talking about what the Virginia High School League. We're going to call them changes, but the reality is the micro focus that the high school league has on transfers and athletic eligibility. Now, this is our first opportunity to do it. So I'm grateful to you guys for giving us this chance.
Yeah, and it's funny you say no one's read the rules, and that's how it is, right? With a lot of things. But now everyone's an expert.
Right.
Now everyone's an expert. Well, let me tell you about Section Z. Rule 101. They're doing that all wrong. So everyone knows everything now.
And that happens, by the way, because if you read one section of the handbook but don't know what the other 253 pages say, you are definitely going to miss how this section has to be played in after this one. And
Right.
And it's not easy. And honestly, if we have coaches and DSAs that do know it and are better equipped to help families, then we'll have less families make bad decisions. And that has to be our goal with this process.
Yeah, I think when going through your slideshow, a lot of it's just clarification, right? A lot of it was people thought there were shades of gray in there, but in reality it was black and white. I think a lot of it kind of goes in there. So I'm kind of kick this off with some of the questions I had. So one of the changes is no family member can continue resident. Oh no, I'm sorry, not that one. It's about the lease agreement where they have to have a landlord or property manager. Now, unfortunately, we have students out there who just don't. That's not their living situation.
That's right.
You have the homeless act, all the things for kids who are in crisis, and I'm 100% in helping those kids out, because when a kid is dealing with that kind of stuff, the last thing you want to do is kind of hammer that kid where the kid now is uneasy about playing it. So how does FCPS plan on handling when a student like that who's in that kind of situation legitimately, how is FCPS going to vet that exactly?
Yeah. So, let's kind of reset everybody with what the Virginia High School transfer rule is. All right. Because I think this will really help, because you and I see it exactly the same way. We should be getting kids playing sports, especially when their home life makes sports maybe the most important thing they do.
Yeah.
So the Virginia High School handbook transfer rule makes everybody ineligible when they change schools by default, right? That's the rule. It always has been the rule. And then it's incumbent on the parent, the family, and the school to provide the evidence, the documentation that meets the rule, right? And the specific rule that you're talking about, 28871, where you've got to provide a fixed and permanent address in order to qualify under the rule, right? In order to satisfy the threshold, it's fixed and permanent. And the high school league is looking at permanent lease documents, right? Where if you live there, your name's on the lease. That's evidence of fixed and permanent. So to meet 28871, that's what's going to be required. But there are 17 exceptions to the transfer rule 28871, right? And you used one, McKinney-Vento, right? It's like you have a student who is actually couch surfing, right, and qualifies for services through the school division, then they're not going to meet 28871, but they're going to meet 2887217, which is the McKinney-Vento exception. And then if their situation is so bad but they don't qualify for one of those exceptions, there's a hardship appeal available for every single student who is ruled ineligible. Right. So for those kids that you and I are talking about and that we have this compassion for, there's a pathway to eligibility, but it's not through 28871 if they don't move the full family to a new residence.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I've always thought too, if a kid comes in with a McKinney-Vento, and I've been teaching for over 20 years. You always taught for a long time. Dash has. I'm always thought to myself too, when those kids come in, although I want those kids involved in athletics, the first thing I want to make sure is those kids are getting fed. Those kids have access to clean clothes. Those kids have access to meals. Because I think a lot of times people don't realize with those students in particular, one of their biggest hurdles they have is they're just malnutrition, because they're not getting the food that they need. So I think when those kids walk in, a lot of times I think that, and especially I think for coaches and athletics, when you get a kid in that situation, you ought to be like, okay, let's figure out how we can get this kid healthy. Let's figure out how we can get this kid fed and clothed.
Yeah, and candidly, we have hundreds of students in Fairfax County that need those helps, those resources, right? And coaches are not using McKinney-Vento to get kids to play football that don't need those resources. So we have a terrific homeless liaison office in the county that really does take care of those kids. So they come to those folks, all of those resources get provided as needed. And then we can start worrying about school enrollment and athletic eligibility. Like, that is not part of the discussion until that student is settled, right?
Yeah, 100%. No, I agree.
But you guys went, and that's good. That's because McKinney-Vento was a big topic, over the last several months. So that's good that you guys kind of talked about that. One, I'm going to go just the most standard, being just, Joe Dad in FCPS, and I'm watching the news and I'm hearing stuff. I guess the most common thing infraction that I would think is happening is, Joe Schmo, does not move, right? Gets a lease, whatever, fakes it essentially, right? And then uses that. And then they're just driving, I'm driving my kid every day to whatever school that I wanted him to go to. That's probably the most common, you know, I'll use the word cheating or whatever we want to, whatever word we want to use that happens. How is that to be combated? Like, is that still self-report, or can you tell us more about? Because that probably is the most common thing you're gonna have to deal with.
It is, right? Again, I'll go back to the default. Every kid is ineligible until they prove eligibility under the transfer rule, right? So 28A71 requires them to vacate their previous residence, right? And this is where generations of morphing the understanding of the rule leads to, let's call it, difficulty enforcing an aspect that we haven't practiced enforcing, right? So like our habits become our practices, right? And over decades and over generations, we have not practiced the enforcement of 28A71 and requiring the parents to provide us evidence that they have vacated their previous residence in order to satisfy 28A71. So I think, I started out by talking like these aren't real changes to the Virginia high school league rule. There is a significant new aspect with the postseason eligibility for some students, and we can get into that a little bit, I hope. But the rules haven't really changed. It's just that microscope focus now on doing the right thing. So our FCPS is layering this 28A71 for every kid who transfers in at the secondary level, like 9 through 12. Every kid. There'll be thousands of them over the course of the year. Do they provide us the fixed and permanent evidence for their new address? Do they provide us the evidence of abandoning and vacating the previous address? And then do they provide us evidence to dispel any notion of athletic motive? All three of those elements will be reviewed at the division level, at the school level, at the coach level, right? And we'll hold each other as a county accountable for each of those three levels. So if a kid passes that vacated partition one of the three-step 28A71 process, it's because the parents have provided evidence that they have vacated, right? So it's not just we have a new address and then we put the blinders on and go, oh, they live here, it must be all good, because the reality is step one is you have to vacate and abandon the previous one. So until we have evidence of that, there is no eligibility. And again, that's not new. That's the way it's always been. We just have to create our own habits of enforcing it that way. So the most common example of, let's just call it skirting the transfer rule, which is you provide a valid address where you live, right? It might even be fixed and permanent, and that you have a long-term lease with your name on it. Won't work if they don't also have evidence that they vacated the previous one. And an example, in certain parts of our county, you might have a $2 million home. You have to sell it. You can't rent it. You can't leave it for your weekend home. You can't let your brother-in-law live there. Abandon and vacate means it's not yours anymore, and it's not for your benefit. So if you don't sell your home, you're not going to meet 28A71. Period.
No, right? So you can't rent it. It's not. I thought renting.
No.
Okay.
You
have
to abandon. The word abandon is in there, right? Like it's not abandoned if you're renting it and profiting from that rental, right? Now, again, let's talk about this, because we may have families who choose that path for reasons not related to athletics, which is why there is an appeal process for every kid in Virginia with all eligibility things, right? So you might find yourself where this school, this home is not where we will be residing. So we're going to reside here now, but we're not going to sell that for financial reasons or otherwise. It's a family home and we don't want to sell it. So you're not going to meet 28A71. So you go through the appeal process and you state your case as to why this isn't an athletically motivated move. You have a group of very professional, very reasonable principals who hear your appeal. And if your case meets the threshold, then you're going to be granted eligibility, right? Like it's just not as impersonal as folks want to make it believe. Like we're not hiding behind rules. It's just also not personal when we rule you ineligible, right? We're going to follow the process. And if you're ineligible, we're going to help you get through the appeal process. And if your case meets the threshold, you'll be eligible. And if it doesn't, then you won't be eligible.
Is that part of the 12 items? Is that kind of what you go through?
Mason, repeat that one for me.
I'm sorry. Is that part of that 12-item checklist? I believe that's on the slideshow. Is that where
so the 12-item checklist is actually the athletic motive Yeah.
Oh,
So that's step 3 in that 28871 process. So, step 1 is really easy. Abandon and vacate your previous. Step 2 is a little harder with the fixed and permanent, to your point that not everybody's going to end up with the same lease or the same mortgage. But step 3 is the athletic motive, and the schools and the parents. It's incumbent on the parents to provide evidence that it is not athletically driven. Right? And I will say that is a new emphasis. Nobody is, to my knowledge, in any school division, including Fairfax, has vetted a vacated home, a new fixed address, and athletic motive. Right? That has now specifically been written into 28871. Again, people always knew you shouldn't do it, but it wasn't specifically written, so we didn't practice it. And now it's specifically written. And in order to grant a student eligibility under 28871, we've got to say we have evidence that says this is not athletically motivated. It's not really as hard as it sounds, proven a negative, right? But that's where that 12-item checklist comes in. I'll give you an example. If you sell your house and you move to a new fixed and permanent address, but you played for that coach in the summer, it's going to be an athletic motive by default. And you're not going to be eligible under 28871. You might meet an exception. You might be granted an appeal, but you're not going to be stamped as eligible if there's an athletic motive. And that's what that 12-bullet checklist does. Provide sort of some fact-based cases where if this exists, it's athletic motive.
okay.
Right. And then it puts it back on the parents to show why that isn't the case.
Yeah.
Are some of those specifics? I was having a hard time determining whether it was FCPS specific or VHSL specific.
Yeah, and that's fair because in December we talked a lot and we met with coaches and we had discussions about what would FCPS do to kind of reinstill confidence among our staff, among our communities, that we could control what we viewed as either out of control or not palatable, right? Which is this movement for sports. So we prepared ourselves for meetings and community engagement and focus groups and, what would FCPS be willing to tolerate? What would be our appetite for doing something that no one else in the Commonwealth was going to do because we had a specific problem? And the reality is it's not a FCPS specific problem, right? And thankfully, the Virginia High School League took the step that we would have had to take. And now it's a statewide microscope on this issue. So what you saw was all VHSL language. That slide deck I shared with you, that was a presentation, sort of a training. It's loosely a training, right? It's an introduction for our school-based staff. Is all VHSL language with a few things about in FCPS, our residence office would handle this or central office will handle that. But it's all VHSL language and it applies to all 318 schools in the Commonwealth.
I think that's good. That's huge because I know one of the worries for a lot of coaches were, are we at a disadvantage here on this side of the state, with more strict rules than other parts of the state. So if that's the case, then I think at least that takes that argument away from a lot of coaches who are worried about that.
Yeah, listen, I'm a coach too, right? And in education-based sports, winning is never our purpose, right? But it's a goal of every single coach. And if we have coaches that's not a goal for, then we're missing something. Right. But it's not our purpose. But because it's our goal, we don't want to set ourselves up for failure to reach our own goals, right? By having rules that other people don't have to play by. And again, we would have been willing to do it because we did recognize that if nothing else, we needed more consistency across all 25 than we were currently experiencing. But we didn't have to do that, right? And again, I give a lot of credit to the staff at the high school league for recognizing this, doing their research across the not just across the Commonwealth, but across the nation and what other states are doing, and deciding that for Virginia, this was the best path.
Yeah. Well, I found it interesting, like vetting on the sports motivated move. And I know we had talked before too about vetting moves. Like in California now, you have to turn off the power, turn off the water, get a driver's license, get a California ID or an ID, a state issue ID with your new address on it. You have to change your mailing address, the whole thing on there. So I find it really, I'm glad that at the very least you're making people jump through some hoops, so that way it's just not kind of, oh, here is a boilerplate lease I
Piece
found
of paper
on the internet.
Right.
I'm gonna fill it out really quick and like, I live in this address now. All right, good. And
Yeah, you know, and when this is a unique problem to Fairfax with our 25 schools, right, Mate? So like we have that exact decision that you're talking about being made 25 times in 25 different ways, right? And with 25 different processes, which makes it very inconsistent in terms of whether this paper works at this school or this paper doesn't work, right? So, and it might even depend on who in the office at that time is reviewing the paper. It's not just a school thing. And that's a challenge to get consistency across all 25. And that's a big emphasis for us is that we're going to centralize that initial review of all documents. So, you know, if we see that Googled lease and it looks the same as all the other Googled leases, right, then we might have more questions for the parents. And again, this process has always been incumbent on the parents to provide the information the school needs to rule your kid eligible. And again, that's a really important default. I'll probably say it 6 times while we talk about the rules. The default is every transfer is ineligible until the evidence documentation is provided that they are eligible or do meet the standards. So we'll engage with the parents. We'll make sure the parents have supplied the right things. And then we'll let the school know we have everything that we need to vet their eligibility. And we're here to collaborate on the decision.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you. So is there, I know the budget's tight. That's been the other big story of the week, right?
Yeah.
Is there some new hires in the county to kind of, I don't know, almost like transfer detective? They wear a fedora and they just kind of in a trench coat and they kind of walk around. Because if you're looking for that, you know, I got 9 years left. That'd be a nice little part-time. That's a good idea. Part-time gig, walk around, do investigations.
Absolutely. So we got this new hire on this one. We got this new hire here. We got like 2 big new shoulders where this is going to fall on. You know, I'd love to say that this is a staff issue, but it's really a process and systems issue. And if our process and systems are good and we realize that we're understaffed, then we can make that case to the superintendent and the school board. But until we have good processes and systems, let's not guess that it's a staff issue, right? You know, let's not guess that 10 more people would do a better job with bad systems. So we're going to spend this summertime and we're going to spend this school year sitting in the new VHSL microscope of this rule, and we will develop systems and processes. And should we feel overwhelmed, then we'll ask the community support to add staff as needed. But
yeah, I mean, I'll go to the window, kind of look and see. Wait a minute, not abandoned. There's stuff in here. I see a couch.
Yeah,
I'll call you up and let you know.
But you know what? One of the more amazing things that as people you know, review what goes on around the county, should they learn that the county essentially has 1 residency officer for 184,000 kids, you know, and again, sports transfers, by the way, are about, you know, we're talking about like 500 or 600 kids who actually end up on rosters for teams following a transfer. There are 184,000 kids, right? That residency officer is doing really important things with regard to all levels, K-12. So we're really not staffed to do exactly what you're talking about. So again, systems and processes, we also weren't asking for anything. So we were taking that responsibility entirely on ourselves and on our schools to say, we are going to make this decision on whether they've abandoned or not without any documentation or evidence. So we will kind of revise that process and we'll put the parents in charge of providing us what we need to make the decision. And where we feel like they can't, then we'll seek out other resources, right? Maybe it's a residence investigation, maybe it's an interview with the parents. But the first thing is the documents, right? You know, we've been making decisions without paperwork, and now we've got to get back to everybody will provide the same documentation. Every case will be vetted in exactly the same way, using the same standard and same threshold across all 25 schools and all 25,000 kids that want to play sports.
I have another question regarding specialty schools. Now, most of the schools around the state, right? I mean, Prince William, I know down south they have a ton of specialty schools where kids are able to go to essentially school of choice if they get in there, where Fairfax seem to have a ton of those. And there's an exception for TJ and for Edison for their STEM programs. Yeah. What was the rationale between kind of excluding things like foreign languages? I think that doesn't count, and other things. And then on the flip side, what would a school have to do now? Is that a district thing where they decide whether the school is especially in school, or does that have to go to VHSL?
Yeah, so the VHSL determines what an academy or specialty program is, and I'll use Edison's program because the principal, Mandy Burke, the DSA, Greg Dombrowski, and I worked for a couple of months once we realized that if this ninth grade rule were to go into effect, they'd have 30 kids, 40 kids in their STEM program that they were recruiting to come there who would all be ineligible to play sports at Edison. That would be a tough sell.
Yeah.
So we worked hard on creating the sort of the dossier of what that STEM program looks like, presented it to the high school league, and they agreed, yes, this is a program, right? So contrast that with a course, which is what a world language is, right? World language is a course, not a program in the Virginia High School League's mind. And while you can say that it's a program, if you take it for 4 years, there's a progression of that. Progression isn't the only criteria for program, right? Program is expansive, not a course taking pattern. So honestly, because we don't have to vet it today, it'll be interesting over the course of the next year how the league and how FCPS treat AP and IB, because across the Commonwealth, the VHSL's perspective is that is not a program where it exists in plentiful numbers. If there is a school division where there is a single IB school, for instance, then it will meet the criteria of specialty program, sort of like an HVAC academy, right? If it only exists in one place, then they're going to give it an academy or specialty program tag. In Fairfax, I think candidly, the league looks at us and says, you have 25 schools, you have a $4 billion budget. You could have IB anywhere, right? So it is not, the league has not given us permission to treat AP and IB as a specialty program for now. So if we get an upperclassman that transfers under that tag today, they will not be eligible next year under the transfer rule.
Okay.
I'm just anecdotal, right? I think from what just my observations, over the last 20 years, I feel like right below lying about transferring, right, about addresses, right? That's probably the most common like fib. I think, all of a sudden being a junior and saying, I'm going to try or senior, I'm going to try the IB. No, buddy, senior year, you want to try the IB, get out of here. But that is something that some people, I'm not saying it's probably a very small number, but some people might want to kind of, use, right? So I agree with that, actually. I agree with that.
Yeah, Dash, I haven't been in Fairfax very long, but I have seen exactly what you described in my very short time here, where the practice in FCPS has been, if that student's allowed to transfer, and they should be allowed to change schools for academic programs, let them go. But our practice has been that we haven't vetted their athletic eligibility. We've just granted it. And that has always been, by the way, a stick in the craw of the Virginia High School League. We should not be doing that, right? We should be vetting it. It should qualify as an academy or specialty program, or they should meet the transfer rule. And I think that's our commitment to the league. And it's our commitment to our communities. It's our commitment to our coaches that we will do that now, right? We will all be complying with the high school league rules consistently across all 25. And should we get a student that wants to transfer into their senior year to take one IB class out of school, they absolutely have the right to do that, but they won't be playing football.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. Now, you said a second ago, you compared it to HVAC. You were saying in like an HVAC, for example, would that count, or would that not count as a transfer?
Yeah, so it's up to the school division to present the case that you have to be in by this point in your career. Sometimes it's 9, sometimes 10, mostly 9 around the Commonwealth, right? Because you're going to start taking courses that lead you through a program where you graduate with a certificate in that area, right? But Fairfax doesn't have that system, right? Other school divisions, our neighbors to the south, for instance, you go to a school for a program in 9th grade with the intention that you will graduate with a certain certificate or a certain set of skills because you're there for 4 years. Our academy program is not set up that way. Our kids don't change schools to go to the academy programs, right? So we can have a kid come out of our Fairfax Academy, Fire Academy, be a certified firefighter, but they don't have to change schools to do that. So their eligibility stays where it is, right? And that's a shout out, kudos to my own son who did that. Fantastic program.
Yes, he did. He was passionate about that too.
It was great. It was crazy.
Now, so that would, by looking at it, that's probably the only big difference as far as the transfer page, right, of all this stuff on the slides between FCPS and maybe some districts, elsewhere, is the program stuff. Other than that, it seems to be right. Is there anything else that you notice that's different?
So the big buzz for the last couple of months was this new category of postseason ineligibility that was going to be ascribed to all transfers. So if you played Sport A at the school last year, you transfer for any reason, you're going to be ineligible for the postseason the following year. And that was the way it was written. That was the way it was understood. That was the way it was described to schools at the VHSL March membership meeting. But that is not the way it is today. So a lot of the teeth came out of that postseason ineligibility section that is added by they essentially chopped off a whole sentence and a paragraph and just left it as, if you meet the transfer rule, then you are postseason eligible. So now you've got that situation where if you move, vacate and abandon your previous, establish a fixed and permanent, and there's no athletic motive, you are eligible for the postseason. And again, without reviewing whether you played the sports before. So you can see how drastic a shift that was in just 30 minutes at the executive committee meeting on May 7th, right? We went in thinking just about every transfer was going to be ineligible for the postseason, and we left thinking just about every transfer is going to be eligible for the postseason. But there are a few cases that I think, again, we've got a whole bunch of schools and a whole bunch of kids, and they move around for a lot of reasons. One of the more common exceptions in the Virginia High School League transfer rule book section is the parent-to-parent move. So you have parent A who lives in this school division and parent B who lives over here, and they just change schools. And there is a pathway for eligibility for that student, but that is not 28A71, the bona fide rule. So a kid who does that will be postseason ineligible. So if they play football at school A and they want to go to school B under that exception, it does not meet the criteria for postseason eligibility. So there will be a few postseason ineligible kids who don't meet 28A71 and do need to use one of the exceptions to become regular season eligible. But I have no idea how many of those kids will come, because parents will make choices like, hey, if I can't play in the basketball postseason, I'll just stay where I am. So I don't know.
No, that's a good one. You bring that that is, I don't know how I overlooked that one. I had that written down, was separation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and you brought that up. So you're saying that, Johnny, parents separate, unfortunately, right? Obviously, that's an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
They separate because actually that's a common one, right? And then he goes to, we're just saying Johnny's a junior and he's at X high school and they separate, let's say, in the summer, in August. And he can now go to Y high school because mom moved to the Y district and he's good except for the playoffs.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
So he's not good. He does not meet 28A71 because he has not abandoned the previous residence with the whole family coming with you, right? So it's not going to be a 28A71 bona fide change of residence. So he's going to have to meet some other exception. And if he meets exception 13, which is the move between parents, and that's not a given, but if he meets the exception, then he won't be postseason eligible because exception 13 is not a bona fide move, right? 28A71, only bona fide moves. Full family unit, new address. If we create 2 units out of the old 1 unit, it doesn't meet the threshold for 28A71. And I think, again, part of the microscope of that the league is putting on certain aspects of this that have clearly been neglected around the Commonwealth for a while is the timing of the separation can have some impact on a student's ability to be granted an exception 13 waiver. The reality is that the end of sports seasons tends to be a great marriage counselor around the Commonwealth, right? We separate and then the season's over and all of a sudden we're back together. And it happens all over. We hear stories from the league about it. I'm
glad you said it because I was going to say I don't want to be a jerk here, but I'm sure.
And this is a very if there are marital troubles and the household needs to split, it's a very serious thing. We don't need to make light of it.
Right. We're talking about the ones that are lying,
but the ones that are using it to create a better athletic opportunity for their kids are going to have trouble now. The separation in time becomes really important. I'm going to give you an example. If parent A has lived in this school district for 5 years and parent B has lived in this school district for 5 years because they've been separated for 5 years and the kid's been going back and forth for 5 years, then they're going to qualify for an exception 13 almost without question, right? Because of the length of time that exists.
Yep.
It almost removes the need to vet athletic eligibility because that's where the parent lives. But it's an exception 13, so it's still not going to be postseason eligible, but they will be able to play the sport going between that parent to parent one time. And again, in the past, that parent to parent one time has been used a lot, vetted a little, and will be better at that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what I was thinking. Now, but that's a one-time move. If you try and go back to the other parent, is that
not eligible?
Yeah.
No, not eligible. Not eligible. And I said it earlier, everybody who's not eligible has an appeal, but the appeal here is the hardship. So what is the hardship that is making you go back to the place that you needed to leave the first time, right? Because, to get the exception 13, you got to go before a principal's committee and explain why this change of school matters. And if you're going to go back, you got to go back to the same group in theory, not the same humans, but the same group, and explain why now you got to go back. And again, we can all think of circumstances where that's real. And a kid makes this choice because it's absolutely the best for them academically, socially, and whatever. And 6 months later, they're like, that did not work out and they got to go back. But that's why the appeal process exists, right? And that's why we put it in the hands of school professionals, our principals, who can make these kinds of decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. All right. Welcome back. And as we kind of close the sort of part one window there, lot to digest, huh?
Yeah, and I think he may put a lot of people's mind at ease with the transfer rules. I think there was a lot of not necessarily ambiguity, but just kind of people nervous about, what does this mean? What does that mean? How is it going to affect my program? I think he's really spelled out really well how this whole transfers rules are going to be put in place.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he made everything just kind of sound like, okay, it's common sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to a certain degree, it was in the books already, like you said. Now they need to, they've got their panels to enforce it, and they're going to enforce it. I mean, what else can you say, right? He's putting it on them, on the district, and saying we are going to start enforcing this stuff.
Kind of level playing field for everybody, which is probably what everybody wants, right?
Right. So yeah, very impressive. He answered, didn't flinch, stood in the batter's box, right? We're throwing our 45-mile-an-hour fastballs. We don't have any arm strength anymore as we get older, but we gave it everything we had, and he was looking it down, freaking hit him out of the park.
Yeah, no, it was really informative.
Yeah, definitely. Great job by Tom there. So yeah, that's going to close part one, which is us talking about, the transfers and kind of the new policies, right, that they're going to enforce with the transfers in the county. And looking forward to part two coming up shortly. We're going to kind of get into that one in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, until next time, which is going to be very soon, and you can catch the conversation where we get into kind of a lot of the proselytization. And I hope I said that correctly. All right, that word correctly. That'll be the theme of the next episode. We'll see you guys soon at All Hitches.
Yeah.